Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you especially for holding this hearing today on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And I particularly thank the witnesses who have agreed to appear today. I want to say to Mr. Shelton that I think it was perfectly appropriate to have a high representative of the NAACP on this panel. First, to indicate that hate appears to be of a piece. I would hypothesize that if you find someone who hates Jews, he will also find that he hates African Americans. If we keep that web together, we perhaps can understand the latest FBI statistics. The most frequently targeted group for hate offenses is African Americans. 47% of hate offenses are motivated by race or ethnicity or ancestry. That may be because they're looking at people they can identify by those characteristics. Perhaps in recent times, the most notorious of the hate crimes was the Dylan Roof invasion of a church, no less, a storied African-American church in South Carolina, the oldest church in the South, during Bible study. I don't know if he chose the church and the time, but the symbolism cannot be lost on any of us. I am concerned with the increase in anti-Semitism, and one wants to know, where in the world does this come from? Why wasn't there an increase 10 years ago? Mr. Shelton, do you see a relationship between an increase in anti-Semitic and anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic attacks, and the increase I just spoke of, the increase in hate offenses motivated by race or ethnicity?
Absolutely. The ideology shared as we look at those who committed these horrific crimes is so very similar. As a matter of fact, as we listen to those who made presentations about various experiences of the Jewish community, I sat there checking off boxes of the same strategies so often being utilized against African Americans, whether you're vilifying African American men, somehow deciding that they are all going to be racist and violent rapists as well. We've heard the same stories told about what happened very well as we think about having the Jewish men too in the ghettos, and certainly the language is used very similarly. So what we're seeing is an increase of the same organizations that very well hate African Americans and hate Jewish Americans and anyone that's not white Anglo-Saxon, as a matter of fact, in our society, carrying forward the ideologies of the Third Reich. So the similarities are very clearly there as we look at even the hate crimes data that's shared with us by the Justice Department, making sure we have categories that cover all these areas and seeing very well that the increases are consistent regardless of the group you're talking about. And certainly the experiences of the African American community are extremely similar to those of the Jewish community.
Mr. Greenblatt, there's been a long special relationship between American Jews and African Americans. In fact, the only whites who have consistently been vocal and active in the civil rights movement and with respect to matters having nothing to do with themselves but on race alone have been American Jews. That special relationship is long, even to the founding, I think, Mr. Shelton, of the NAACP itself, where among the founders were American Jews. Could I ask you, in light of your own work, what has the Anti-Defamation League found about threats and increases, threats and violence against African Americans, the figure I just spoke of, and of the relationship? And what do you think can be done about the rise of anti-Semitism and racist attacks going on at the same time?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I think first and foremost, I would reinforce what you said. The relationship between Jewish Americans and African Americans is long and deep. There is a shared history of suffering. There's a shared history of diaspora, if you will. And as the Holocaust was a pivotal moment in the modern Jewish experience, so as enslavement was a pivotal moment for African Americans. And I think understanding our shared suffering has been critical to the success we've had together. I'm proud of the fact that Ben Epstein, who was the head of the ADL in the 50s and 60s, stood and marched with Dr. King in Selma. And I'm proud of the fact that we filed an amicus brief on Brown v. Board of Education and joined the NAACP in doing that. And I'm proud of the fact that we work today on so many issues together. Because make no mistake, from Charleston to Charlottesville, to Pittsburgh, to Poway, there is a through line. White supremacy is a violent threat against all marginalized groups. And the people, as my colleague Hillary said, who hate Jews also hate African Americans, simply because they and we are different from their majoritarian view. Now, there's a lot more work to be done. I would commend Congresswoman Lawrence and Congressman Wasserman Schultz for helping to start the bipartisan caucus on Black-Jewish relations. I had the privilege of addressing a group of Black and Jewish legislators 2 years ago with my friend Derek Johnson from the NAACP. There is so much more work to do. I mean, at ADL, we were founded after a Jewish man was lynched in 1913. He was lynched after having been falsely accused of a crime, essentially a blood libel, of murdering a Christian girl. But what I would note is that when that man was lynched, Leo Frank, the founders of ADL, they wrote a charter for this new organization, and in it are the words we still use today as our mission statement. And what they wrote was that this organization would, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I'll just say what they realized was that you can't defend American Jews unless you defend all Americans. And we're deeply committed to that mission 100 years later today.